Welcome to the show. Glad you're here. What's the truth about this lockdown? Should we have had a lockdown over the CCP virus at all? What's the truth about the efficacy of masks? And more broadly, what's the impact in terms of anxiety and social distress, depression, and suicide rates in light of the lockdown of this CCP virus phenomenon? This is our topic. Stick around. Lots more to come. This episode brought to you by my website. That's not the name of it. It's patrickcoffin.media. Go there, check out the blog, tons of video vaults. All of my almost 200 shows are there. Lots of commentary on faith and culture. patrickcoffin.media. You can also get unspeakably cool merch for the having. Go to patrickcoffin.media, and I'll see you on the inside. Welcome back. As promised, my guest is Dr. Joel Hay. He's a professor and founder of the Department of Pharmaceutical Economics and Policy at the University of Southern California. He's a health economist as well at the Harbor UCLA Center for Vaccine Research and has substantial experience on surveys regarding depression, anxiety, and the economic burden of disease. Joel, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks, Patrick. I'm really happy to be on your show.
I learned about you through our mutual friend, Michael Fumento, whom I've had as an insider guest on our feature called Transform You. I learned a ton from him over the years about how early modeling of pandemics, Freudian slip, pandemics, they're useful but almost invariably wrong. Is COVID-19 the latest in a series of these misbegotten predictions?
Absolutely. And Mike Fumento and I are brothers in arms. Back 40 years, we both were skeptics on the AIDS epidemic. Back then, Anthony Fauci and all the public health officials in the media were telling us all kinds of alarmist things. In fact, in the early 90s, there was even a Newsweek cover story. And on the cover of the Newsweek article that week, it said, 1 out of every 5 American babies is going to be HIV positive at birth.
Yep.
Do you know that since then, there's only been a few thousand, in the last 40 years, a few thousand babies with HIV. And now there are none because we now have essentially cures to keep AIDS under control. But the same type of alarmist tactics that Fauci and Redfield and Birx are using now, they cut their teeth on them back then.
Anthony Fauci began his job as the director. I keep forgetting, it's a very forgettable acronym, the National Institutes of Illnesses and Diseases, or is it allergies? The NI, you'd know it, obviously.
It's allergies and infectious diseases.
Yeah.
And, he's been the head of the Institute for Allergies and Infectious Diseases for longer than just about any.
1984. And
it's really amazing. Like even a tenured professor like me has a much greater chance of being fired than this guy who keeps getting it wrong for 40 years, and yet they keep keeping him there as just an incompetent director. He really has forgotten everything he knew about how virology works when he switched from HIV, which is a slow-moving virus. Remember, HIV, which causes AIDS, is a lentivirus, which means it moves very slowly. This is the exact opposite. Corona-19, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is probably the fastest-moving virus to hit humanity in recent years. It is clearly the fastest moving virus since we developed the so-called ability to do genetic testing and polymerase chain reaction testing and antibody testing, because all of those tests have gotten it completely wrong and have fooled a lot of smart people about what is actually happening with COVID-19.
When do you think COVID-19 began to manifest? I don't want to get into whether it was created at the Wuhan Virology Institute. That's another topic that I've covered in other shows. But is it December, November 2019? When do you believe sort of patient one emerged?
Yeah. Now, it's important to keep in mind that although it very well could be that this virus has been around for hundreds, maybe thousands of years in one form or a slight mutation, because it's essentially endemic in animal species, very similar to C19. In fact, maybe the same virus is endemic to animals. But we can say in the case of humans that there is no question that C19 was in the United States, not in 2020 when they claimed that a nursing home in Washington state came down with an epidemic of 28 cases, and that was late February, and they try to claim that that was the first case. But we now know, and it's well known, although the alarmists like to suppress it, a woman by the name of Patricia Dowd died on February 6th, 2020, in San Jose, California, and they can trace through autopsy her back to being infected in November 2019. All right, now there's lots and lots of other evidence that C19 was in this country in the fall of 2019. But this is sort of like black and white, closed, shut case. No one can dispute that she died on February 6th, and no one can dispute that she was infected in November. So why do we lock down the entire country 5 months after we know that a case has died with this virus? And we know that this is the fastest moving virus in history. It has what the epidemiologists used to know. It seems how epidemiologists seem to forget all the stuff they used to know. And they conveniently forget these things. But they used to know that an R of 6, a reproduction factor of 6 for a virus, is highly infectious. It is about as infectious as a virus in the wild could get. It's not as infectious as polio, but we don't want people getting polio again. It's not as infectious as measles, but we don't want people getting measles again. But it is to the point where one person in one day is going to infect, on average, 6 people that he comes in contact with in one day. So if you could have stopped it in the first hour, wherever it started, you might have had a shot at stopping it with contact tracing. But once you got past day 1, it's already flown from Wuhan to LA and 6 other locations. And it's already flown from LA to New York and 6 other locations. And it's already the next day flown from New York to London and 6 other locations. And the next day it's flown from New London to Mumbai and 6 other locations. And meanwhile, from Wuhan, it's going the other direction around the world, from Wuhan to Mumbai or to Moscow or to Phnom Penh. It's going everywhere.
And let's not forget Italy.
Bingo. And who was in Italy? A very large contingent of Wuhan factory workers, textile workers that they imported and put in those alpine valleys out of sight to make the so-called fantastic Italian fabrics.
Right. Do you believe that COVID-19 has infiltrated just about every community in the world already?
Absolutely. If you look at my website, which I started about the time of the lockdown, maybe even before, I can't even remember, I've said COVID-19 was everywhere in the world by the time you guys even started counting cases. COVID-19 has what I call a saturated seroprevalence. And in addition to Patricia Dowd, I've got lots and lots of other sources of evidence to document that, including the fact that wastewater, and there's now a company in Boston that is doing wastewater testing. This is now a technology that municipal utilities are paying money for this technology because they're using it to manage the rate of C19 infection in a city. They say it's faster than testing and contact tracing because you can see it right in the sewage water. It's right there. So if there's a breakout You don't have to test a bunch of people. Just go look at the sewage water and you'll see whether it's there. Well, guess what? They've gone back. They've looked at the sewage water in Barcelona, Spain. Top epidemiologists that know how to do this. They invented this technology. And they can prove that C19 was in Barcelona right at the time of a huge international computer convention in March of 2019. March 2019. So a year before we locked down, it was already massively all over Barcelona. And if it was in Barcelona, the next day it was in every place they flew back home from. Remember how now people are going after people because they go to a party in Florida and they say, oh, you come back home and you spread it to us. Mm-hmm. Well, people doing that a year before this even started. Guess what? For a whole year, no one noticed any increase in death because there wasn't any. It's not that lethal.
This is my next question. My home province of Nova Scotia has a population of 972,000. There have been a grand total of 64 deaths. If all you did was watch Canadian media or talk to people on the ground who are force-fed 24/7 the fear porn, you would think that, like AIDS, it's falling from the sky. You remember when AOL used to have those discs? They were like everywhere. These startup, like they look like CDs. You would think that there's a COVID behind every shrub. That if you don't wear a mask, you're a grandma killer. But the numbers don't bear out. We're talking a tiny sliver of 1%. Do you believe that COVID-19 is more lethal than your standard influenza A or B each season?
No, I don't believe that COVID-19 is more lethal than a normal flu. It may be slightly more lethal than a normal flu in the sense that we have no natural immunity and we have no artificial immunity like a vaccine. So it rockets through the body. You can't stop it, at least initially. Now, after a few months of C19 rocketing around the world, the immunity levels did start to go up. Now, the interesting thing about C19 virology is they won't tell you just exactly why these tests don't work. So when they tell you how many people have it in Nova Scotia or don't have it in Nova Scotia, that's all utter nonsense because they don't know. They don't have the right tests. Let me tell you what I mean by that. And I've got experts on my team that have taught me this, but they are not being welcomed by their fellow virologists because they're not spouting the party line. But here's the thing. This virus is actually so non-lethal that most people don't even develop antibodies to it. Now, keep in mind, if you have a really bad infection, including flu or cirrhosis caused by hepatitis C or Hep B or Hep A or lots of diseases, your natural immune system develops antibodies because it's a bad antigen. You want to neutralize it, but you can't develop antibodies against everything that's out there. Your blood would explode. There's not enough room. Antibodies are big mast cells. They're white cells in the blood, and you can't have antibodies against everything. So the body conserves its antibodies and only gives you antibodies against the things that might actually kill you or make you real sick. It says, this thing? No way. Get it out of here. We don't even need antibodies for this. It's, we got this little T cell memory thing, and if it ever comes back, we'll just zap it with that. So the body knows how to handle this. It's the idiots at NIH and CDC that don't even understand that. And they used to understand T cells because Anthony Fauci was all about AIDS, and AIDS is caused by a virus that kills T cells. He knew what T cells were. How come he forgot T cells 40 years later with C19?
Why wasn't he fired by endorsing prescriptions like AZT for AIDS, which led to the death of hundreds, if not thousands, of homosexuals who are suffering from AIDS? Why you can't? They never lose their jobs. They're like the ever-ready battery bunny.
Yeah, I mean, Fauci has made one false claim after another, always on the alarmist side. He's a very clever politician in the sense that he won't come out and say, hydroxy will kill you or hydroxy will save your life. He'll kind of make wishy-washy statements that can sort of be interpreted different ways, and then he drifts along on his statements, and so it's kind of hard to pin him down. But then the other thing is, no one has the guts to stand up to him because he controls so many resources that the academic doctors would love to have access to. I mean, even I would love to have money from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease to do my vital COVID research and study the wastewater in all the cities of America. By the way, I don't care where you live, get your local wastewater tested and you'll find C19 is all over. But get it tested with the right test, not with these silly tests that Fauci and CDC have been recommending. We can get antibody tests that are guaranteed to be 80% accurate. And if people can find us a municipality that'll open us up and give us their wastewater, we can test it and prove whatever town you're in, it's there. And it's always been there. We can go back 2 years probably. Certainly a year, and we'll find it in your town in the wastewater samples from a year ago. And all of this is discussed at my website, joelhay.com.
Joelhay.com, yeah. I'll put that in the show notes at patrickhoffman.media. You also link to an essay by Dr. Richard Schwartzstein and Ivry Zaguri-Orley on a reminder to reason on succumbing to panic thinking. So when people hear what you just heard, what you just said, there's a phenomenon I've noticed because I work in media that people hear what they want to hear. They'll mentally blot out some of the things you said, and they'll glom on to something else. And one of the things you just said was that it's got this R6 rate of exposure, and it races through humanity quickly, faster than the flu. Do you think the category mistake here is likening it's very contagious with it's very deadly? Because they leap to the most extreme reaction and willingly go along with the lockdown. Is that a category error on the part of the population? See what I'm asking?
Patrick, that is the key question. And let me explain why. Again, this is something that Fauci and the other epidemiologists all knew this before C19, and they conveniently either forgot it or they don't want to tell you. And that is a phenomena called Farr's law, Farr''S law. And it is almost like an iron law of biology that the speed at which a virus or an infectious agent spreads around the globe and the lethality of that virus or antigen are inversely proportional. So if you've got a really deadly virus like Ebola, Ebola is deadly. It can kill you in a matter of hours and anybody you touch in a matter of hours. But think about it. It's hard to spread Ebola if everyone's getting sick and dying within a couple hours. So Ebola is kind of self-limiting. It starts in a village. Now, why did we get some Ebola spread? Because of bad habits of people, for example, not understanding that you really shouldn't touch your dead loved ones and kiss them as you put them in the ground. That's not a good thing with Ebola. And it took a while to change the culture of many people to deal with that particularly lethal connection. We finally got that done, and now we even have a vaccine or a treatment for Ebola. So Ebola, I think, is relatively under control. But that's one extreme. So Ebola is very, very deadly, but it doesn't move very fast. Ebola never got to the United States. Maybe a couple doctors were brought over from Africa, but Ebola never got to the United States because it travels too slowly, and we kept it out. If you take the other extreme, a virus that zips through so fast you don't even notice it, it can't be very lethal. Because if it was lethal, people would be getting sick and say, I'm not going to fly to LA today. I'm going to, stay in bed. Yeah. People self-limit. If they, I don't jump on an airplane if I'm feeling nauseous and have fever and vomiting all over the place. I'm not going to jump on an airplane. No one else would. Or
or go to school or go to work. Common sense.
Right.
Known for decades. Yeah.
Right. common sense makes Farr's law work. If it's not lethal, it spreads rapidly. If it's lethal, it doesn't spread rapidly at all. And C19 is about the most rapidly spreading and non-lethal virus in recent history.
I want to ask you about prisons and the infectious rate and the mortality rate inside prisons. But one thing I've heard thrown up when I ever talk about this is, what about the Diamond Princess cruise ship? 2,666 passengers, 1,045 crew, total of 3,711, resulted in 712 infected persons. People take that story and they produce numbers with no context. You don't know the age of these people. You don't know about comorbidities. You don't know how compromised they were already. And we'll never know the people who were infected that were completely asymptomatic, that their bodies didn't even react because it wasn't lethal at all. So what about the Diamond Princess cruise ship hysteria?
Right. Well, I've been on cruise ships, and I know for a fact that some people go on a cruise because they've got cancer, and this is the last thing they're going to be able to do in their lives. So there are some very sick people on cruise ships. A lot of them don't even tell the crew when they get their tickets because they don't want to be not allowed to go on their final cruise of their lives.
Yeah.
So, you're right. There's a lot of things we don't know. We do know that I think 6 or 7 people died. Every one of them had a comorbidity. So it's my position, and from Diamond Princess right up to now, where the total so-called death toll in the United States stands at over 150,000, I will tell you that I am not aware, and no doctor has brought me a single case of a C19 death that was not comorbid with some other dread disease.
Mm-hmm.
So it's my position that C19 doesn't kill anybody. It may hasten the death of people who are critically ill and have what we call immunosenescence. Their immune systems are just not functional. And there's a lot of people with poorly functioning immune systems. So it is quite possible that C19 gums up the machinery of people at the very end of life and kills them a few weeks earlier, maybe even 8 weeks, maybe a couple months earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But I have yet to see any case of C19 killing somebody all by its lonesome. And yet we have all kinds of preposterous situations. Like here in Ventura County, there are deaths caused, they claim, by C19, but the death was a fentanyl overdose. How does C19 cause a fentanyl overdose? I don't really know. I cite to an article about 4% of all the positive deaths coded by the CDC are gunshot wounds, stab wounds, trauma, accidents. Well, again, my question is, how does C19 take the knife and stick it into your abdomen?
Yeah, or pull that trigger as though the gun is a sentient being that's infected by C19. Right. I hear what you're saying.
We know the answer. At least I know the answer because I'm an economist. It's because you get paid 40% more if you code C19, and no one asks any questions. No one does any utilization review, quality control. You just get paid and you move on.
Paid by whom? Insurance companies?
Insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid, the whole gamut of the healthcare payers.
Is this why someone like Deborah Birx, we've been talking about Redfield, Dr. Fauci, and Deborah Birx, who doesn't even hide it. She said, if you have COVID at the time of death, you are coded as having died of it, not just with it, which means the numbers that we now have that are flaunted are themselves inflated. That almost has to be true, correct?
Absolutely. When I started doing our advanced econometric machine learning data analysis on C19, we were getting good numbers and we were getting pretty accurate predictions. And we saw the peak at about mid-April in the US. But then CDC changed the case definition in March. Mm-hmm. And then you get things like Birx saying, oh, yeah, whatever, if they're C19 anyway. And then we even had New York where they said they brought in a bunch of dead people from nursing homes They didn't bother to test them. They just, they must all be C19. So there's a huge spike of thousands of New York nursing home deaths that they called C19. No one even bothered to test any of those people. Mm-hmm. They just called them all. And that's all. You can still see that spike in the CDC numbers, even though everyone knows they were completely phony. So the C19 data is, at this point, completely political, completely phony, completely determined by economic forces and political forces and the coming election and things like that. And it has nothing to do with science and biology. So what I have done, because I'm a scientist, is I've looked at a much more interesting statistic than C19 deaths, and that's all-cause deaths in the United States. You can't hide all-cause deaths. You can inflate or deflate C19 deaths, but unless you start actually going out killing people, you can't fake all-cause deaths. Well, all-cause deaths are up in April above the 5-year trends by about 80,000 through today. All-cause deaths. And it's our conviction, based on lots of evidence, that that entire spike in April and May, and then a secondary spike that's coming and ending just now in August, is nothing to do with C19, except for the fact that it relates to people that are so scared, panicked, hysterical about C19 that they don't get their needed medical care. They don't go to the hospital for their oncology, for their radiation visits, for their chemo visits. Yeah. They don't get treated for their heart attacks. I know people who have told me that their friends didn't go to the hospital. They felt a chest pain and later determined it was a heart attack, and they were too scared to go. And if there's a study, again, linked on my website, in Colorado, there are thousands of excess heart disease deaths, and the only way they can explain it is the heart disease patients of Denver were too scared to go to the hospital with their heart attacks. So how does C19 kill people? It doesn't. The hysterical pandemic alarmism is what's killing people.
So much there. So much to say right there. There's been a steadily lengthening list of people, whether it's the doctors up in Bakersfield or Judy Mikovits or the frontline physicians who held one a press conference kind of impromptu in front of the Supreme Court. That got deleted, shamed, and removed from polite society, so they did another one. If the scientific method is all about testing hypotheses, and if science should be governed by the marketplace of ideas, why is every single objection raised to the CDC Fauci narrative not argued against, but banned? To me, I think that's red pilling a lot of people who they're not activists, they're not politicized, but this gets under your skin, the one-sided propagandizing and politicizing of what should be healthcare.
I agree. I think that I'm trying to both improve the understanding of the science behind C19 and also deal with the critical public policy issues. Now, keep in mind, Patrick, I'm an economist. I was trained as a PhD economist at Yale. I was not trained in the healthcare field. I and a few others invented health economics about 40 years ago. So I'm coming to health from another background, but that background is now intersecting head on with the public health agenda, because these doctors that shut us down, they have no right to do that because they don't consider the effects of the rest of society. They're doctors. Doctors have a mandate to take care of their patients. So they're willing to do anything to keep their patients alive, including a very frail, elderly 95-year-old. And look, I applaud that at the individual basis. But when they shut down the economy to try and do that, that's wrong. I mean, they could also say, oh, life is so precious, you should never be allowed to drive your car more than 5 miles an hour because you might hit somebody and kill them.
Yeah.
We could do that. And we would have less deaths from people being struck and killed by cars.
40,000 a year, something like that. 40 grand a year, car deaths. Yeah.
We would have 10 times as many deaths from people not being able to go to work, people not being able to earn money, people not being able to have jobs, people being kicked out of their houses, businesses shutting down. Guess what? That's COVID-19. It's locking us down and it's killing the economy. And in states like California, it is really getting scary. You go downtown, you see homeless encampments everywhere. We have riots in many urban centers. It's just getting scary. What's going on?
I'm not sure if it's a point you made or Mike Fumento that you have doctors behaving like politicians, and politicians like our dear leader Gavin Newsom behaving like doctors, making decisions like releasing 8,000 felons over COVID-19, never explained. It's an odd inversion of roles. I thought doctors were supposed to be about the Hippocratic Oath and science, and politicians were supposed to enforce laws and govern the country. Those masks have been transferred.
The world is turned upside down. And let's talk a little bit about Gavin Newsom's decision to release 8,000 hardened criminals onto the streets of California. I'm sure those guys aren't masked and they're not social distancing when they're committing their next crime. But what I will tell you is the prisons are one of my sort of test tube comparisons. As a social scientist, I don't do experiments in labs. I don't do animal experiments. I look at what happens in the real world. And so I consider, okay, if you're claiming this disease, C19, is so lethal, then how would I test that hypothesis? The best way to test such a hypothesis is to compare rates of C19 death in naturally crammed together living spaces with no social isolation and see what the death rate is there against the general population.
Right.
Well, prisoners are an excellent test tube case for this because we have more prisoners per capita locked up in the United States than anywhere else, 2.3 million, and they're all locked up constitutionally. The rest of the civilian population is locked up unconstitutionally. Right. But guess what? The death rate in the general public is almost twice the death rate in prisons, even though we're unable to socially connect and mix and see each other and go to restaurants and go to parks and enjoy ourselves and go to ball games and play ball games and do all that stuff, go to movies, a lot of stuff we can't do. And yet we are worse off than the prisoners who are crammed together, cheek to jowl. For many, many months, they had no masks, and they still have no social isolation in general, and yet they have half the death rate. Well,
half the death rate. That's astounding.
Well, a little bit more than half. And that proves to me that this thing just can't be that lethal because these prisoners, just today, a study came out saying 82% of them are C19 positive. So they've been C19 positive all along. If this was a lethal virus, they'd be dropping like flies.
Yeah.
And they have half the death rate. And by the way, all the deaths essentially in the prison population, just like in the general population, are the old prisoners that are frail, sick, and vulnerable. Again, as a 67-year-old, I'm not going to say age is the key factor to C19 risk. It is not. If your only risk factor is your age, then you have no risk factor because you have to have a comorbidity such as heart disease, kidney disease, lung disease,
asthma,
lung disease, obesity of extreme proportions. So there are young people who've died in this country, a handful, and almost every one of them who is not an end-stage cancer patient was morbidly obese. We're talking 350, 400 pounds people that can barely move. And let me tell you, I don't care if you're morbidly obese or for whatever reason, if you can move around, you got nothing to worry about with C19. If you can move, you're good. If you can't get up off your sofa or out of your bed to go downstairs, you might have a problem with C19. You might,
but that's going to be your cherry on top. It's not going to be the prime cause.
Exactly. It will take you a few weeks earlier.
Mm.
And by the way, if you can't walk down your stairs because you're so morbidly obese, you've got a lot of other problems you need to start working on than C19.
Mm-hmm. Right. Is it called Worldometer or World.info? There's a website whose name I can't remember that allegedly has a kind of a Wall Street ticker number of people dying of certain diseases. I don't know how accurate that is in light of the Birx protocol of including people who have COVID-19 versus die of it. But what, in the best of your knowledge, analyzing it as a scientist and as an economist, what is the death rate around the world?
Well, of course, no one knows because the tests are still not accurate. So no one knows. But the Worldometer data are fascinating for many reasons. And I look at them almost every day and I rank them by all the different things. And you find some very interesting things. Mm-hmm. Okay. The United States is way up there in terms of deaths per million. We're at about, last time I checked, about 550 deaths per million, which that's a big number, but it's not even remarkable. Even if we believe those numbers, and I think those numbers are highly, highly inflated. I think even if you use just a reasonable estimate, it would, well, I posted it. The Italian advisor to the Ministry of Health said only 8% of the Italian C19 deaths are actually C19 deaths. So I would say that it's at least a factor of 10 in this country, because in Italy, they weren't being paid 40% more to report C19. Mm-hmm. But here they are. So here they'll find every case they can. And we can talk about PCR testing. It is highly inaccurate. And they use what's called an amplification thing. So you take a test tube that has supposedly the C19 sample in it, and you then amp it up. You amp it up. You amp it up. You cycle that 40 times so that you try and pick out any possible little fragment of that virus. And 40 is the max that's recommended for how much you amp this test to try and get a positive. But I've heard anecdotally from all my clinical people in LA, they send the thing and they say the test is negative, didn't come back positive. The doctor said, can't be right. Go amp it up another 40 times. Amp it up another 40 times.
Yeah, just keep.
You amp pure saline 300 times, you'll find C19. You can find C19 in outer space if you amp it 300 times. I mean, this is more amp than a Metallica concert. This is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. So they're whipping the same post to get the desired number, the desired result.
They just keep spinning the sample till they get the right results. And that's just the PCR. The antibody is a Wild West because no one really knows what the right antibodies are. We think we know how to put together an accurate antibody test, mm-hmm. but it's going to take money and time. And unfortunately, the CDC they're not interested in getting accurate tests.
I read on your website that the data is no longer questionable or challengeable, that COVID-19's mortality rate has been far exceeded by other deaths because they were held up, whether it was a cancer treatment or a heart condition, and these people stayed in the sidelines out of hospitalophobia. Many more people. And talk about the people. I have a friend who's a psychiatrist who's lost so far 2 patients directly to this intense anxiety of seeing everyone with masks. The psychic effects on children when all the adults are masked. I mean, the culturally, a mask is a depersonalized posture. It is it's what robbers wear. It's what Antifa wears. Darth Vader has a mask. Bane has a mask. No one's talking about the psychic effects, especially on children, of the mask. I'll call it mask hypnosis, to coin a phrase. What are your thoughts on that? The effect of the masks just on mental health?
Yeah, you are absolutely right, Patrick. And this is something that is so tragic. The effect of the C-19 pandemic and hysteria on kids, on children, is the worst aspect of what Fauci, Birx, and Redfield have done to us. This is just unspeakable. And most countries have figured out, keep the kids in school. Mm-hmm. That's what they're supposed to do. Don't force them into this absolute, utter, sheer nonsense. And let's explain why we know with 100% certainty that it's nonsense to keep these kids out of school. It's nonsense. Let me explain. All right. Even if you take the American data, which is all alarmist, there are almost no deaths below the age of 25. Mm-hmm. Very, very few. By the way, if you're under the age of 65 and have no comorbid conditions, your risk of dying with C-19, you won't die from C-19, but you could die with it, is about the same as your risk of death driving and commuting back and forth to work for about 6 months. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of the millions of people who have been fired from their jobs or had their restaurants shut down or their small businesses shut down or their schools shut down, a lot of people would love the chance to take the risk to drive to work for 6 months and earn a job and earn a paycheck and keep their family secure. Mm-hmm. But no, we've got to lock everybody down. And then instead of teaching the kids, now our kids are going to do what? Take Zoom classes? A 5-year-old with a lousy internet connection is going to be doing Zoom classes with some teacher somewhere? No, I don't have kids that age, but I have grandkids that age. It is not possible.
Everyone's miserable, including the teachers.
And let's say why it's wrong. Sweden never locked down. They never shut their schools for one day. They never did any of this nonsense. The schools have always been open, and they still are in Sweden. And guess how many deaths under the age of 19 there are in the entire 10 million population country of Sweden?
I'm going to guess it hovers near zero.
Yeah, I think there was one reported last week, but it's probably a false positive. Guess what else about Sweden? Sweden, because they're the only country that never locked down, they got the vital herd immunity, which we all crave and need, because with herd immunity, this virus just disappears from vision, just like the flu from 5 years ago. No one is sitting around being all concerned about whether they're going to get the flu that they got 5 years ago.
Yeah,
it's gone. It's gone. You've got the immunoprotective cells to keep it from coming back, and so it doesn't come back. So if you mix the young and healthy, not the frail and elderly and vulnerable, but if you mix the young and healthy, they develop the antibodies, they develop the immunity, they develop the mast cells if they need to. They develop whatever it is, and then that's the protective wall. That's the wall you need for the frail and the vulnerable, not some CDC isolation for biohazard suit, much less these silly masks. What do you do with your mask after you use it? Throw it in the trash, falls on the ground, you pick it up, somebody else picks it up. If this was really a lethal virus, wouldn't we have to dispose these masks in a level 5 biohazard containment facility? I mean, these things, I find them lying all over the street. Yeah. I mean,
they're like the AOL startup discs now. They're everywhere. Yeah. What is herd immunity? It gets bandied about a lot on both sides. Does herd immunity mean, as many people do, think it means that 100% of the population has to get it so that everyone is immune? So what is herd immunity exactly?
No. Herd immunity is the process by which viruses that are relatively non-lethal, at least for the young and healthy, and by this, we're specifically referring to flu, we're referring to coronaviruses in general, not just C19. We're referring to colds, pneumonias. These things can occur in young people. And in fact, flu, ironically, is more lethal to young people than C19. Almost no one. Babies are covered with C19 and they don't even get sick. It's amazing. Doctors can't even explain it. I mean, they test every baby and there's C19 everywhere, but the baby is perfectly healthy.
Yeah.
And can you imagine one of the worst offenses of this whole idiotic public health service is they will rip a newborn baby from a mother's breast who's breastfeeding and getting vital, nutritional, and protective antibodies that have been engineered by nature for billions of years to be perfect for that baby. And they want to rip the baby away because the mother might have C19, even though no babies ever get sick from C19.
Yeah.
That's criminal. I mean, the baby might actually develop a serious illness like necrotizing enterocolitis or many other effects that can kill a newborn. And they're going to take away the best protection that newborn has from the mother because these idiots that used to understand science don't understand it anymore.
Well, this is why it's now called by many people a police state. If you can separate that primal relationship of mother with child in complete absence of actual evidence that there's harm, it's maddening. It's you don't want to be tagged with the word alarmist, but what other response is appropriate to this?
I think we just have to keep trying to educate the public and point to Sweden. Point to Sweden. Sweden was the brave, heroic country that actually looked at the scientific evidence and said, there is no evidence that locking anybody down is going to help with this thing. And we particularly think it will be very damaging to kids. And we don't see any reason to do it, so we won't. And everyone told Dr. Anders Tegnell, who's the head of the public health office of Sweden, that he was a murderer and a madman.
Grandma killer. Yeah.
Risking the lives of 10 million Swedes. And he and his team bravely stuck with it. And they now have the hard-won evidence that the Swedish model works and this other idiotic lockdown nonsense doesn't. And let me show you one more reason why. In addition to the fact that Sweden has no dead kids and all their schools are running fine. Another thing is everyone likes to jump on Sweden because of their so-called high C19 death rate. So let me explain, and I do on my website, let me explain the two facts that you need to know when somebody says, oh, but they have a high death rate in Sweden, C19, which, by the way, is not that high if you took the difference between Sweden's death rate and the U.S. death rate. It would add up to a total of 7,000 dead Americans difference. So that means that we locked down the entire country for possibly saving, even if you believe all those deaths were deaths, which I don't think they are, but for possibly saving 7,000 American lives. Do you think this lockdown has been worth 7,000 American lives?
Well,
if these people were going to die 2 to 8 weeks later anyway, no matter what you did?
I can see someone who's a pro-Fauci narrative and has bought into it saying, oh, Joel Hay is a utilitarian. he's looking at it coldly clinically. He actually sounds like a grandma killer because he wants good people innocent people to die so that we can imitate Sweden. This is how the objection would run.
Excellent point. And here's my response to that. And it's been on my website every day from day one. Yes, every life is precious. And even the life of one person, much less 7,000, is too many to lose. But I hate to say, there's no way out of here other than death. I mean,
the prophet Jim Morrison, no one gets out of here alive.
Right. And the second point is, Sweden has a high death rate because they live so much better that for every American who gets to the age of 85, there are 10 Swedes who get to the age of 85. So if you start your pool of people being attacked by this ruthless, deadly virus, and I'm saying that in air quotes, if you are going to have this virus that kills mostly old, vulnerable, frail people, and there's 10 times as many old, frail, vulnerable people in Sweden as there is in the United States, actually they're doing a much better job than we are because they're still keeping them alive. And we aren't.
That is such a...
And so they get slammed for being too good.
That is such a crazy paradox. That the healthiness, the longevity track record of Swedes produces a higher proportion of people over that age. So they're kind of numerical victims of their own healthy lifestyle. And that's very interesting to chew on.
And here's the next point on that whole scenario with Sweden. Again, Sweden is fascinating. I have yet to hear a single alarmist come up with a good answer to Sweden. They can't. Because Sweden works. Okay, they socially mixed. What does that mean? The young and healthy all now are a protective barrier for the old, frail, and vulnerable in Sweden. Not everywhere else, but in Sweden.
Because of immunity?
What does that? Because of herd immunity.
Yeah.
So that means that they can now look at coronavirus in their rearview mirror. It's gone. It's past. They're done with it. Mm-hmm. And by the way, go to my website, front page. You can look at the number of new ICU admissions in Sweden every day, and it hovers around 0 and 1, and I think the 1 is a false positive. But it hovers. Yeah. It hasn't been above 5 in all of August. All of August. Now, your local hospital, the local hospitals in every state of this country, how many ICU admissions do they have for C19? Hundreds, thousands, all over the place. Sweden is down to 1. 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, yeah. 0, 0, 0, 1. They're done with it. What does Fauci say to that evidence? Sweden's done, you're not. What does he say? Nothing. He has nothing. He has no comeback.
If we end the lockdown and we put away the masks, how quickly does the United States, do you suppose, enter into herd immunity? How long would it take?
I think it would happen very rapidly. I think... I'm not the expert, and I haven't seen tests that would prove it. But Sweden was able to accomplish it in the last few months. Certainly during the time we were locked down, they weren't, and they're done. So I would say you can prove that it works within a matter of 2 to 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Denmark, did they do something similar? I know you have several links to Denmark and how they responded.
Well, that's, again, very interesting. Even though Sweden is the only country that officially never locked down, and the other Scandinavian countries did lock down, all of those countries today have opened up the schools, all of them. They think that children should be in real schools with real education, and they're right. And all of those countries have told their public that mask wearing for the general public has no scientific basis and is not encouraged, and it is not recommended. They say that healthcare workers can and should wear masks in the appropriate environments with patients. Mm-hmm. and to maintain general medical standards. But the general public, according to not only Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and also Holland, masks should not be worn. Now, in this country, you can't even find, if you Google the official policies on masks of those countries. If you talk to doctors in this country before the lockdown, they said masks were a joke. They joked about the people from Wuhan all wearing masks.
Yep.
They said there was no, I remember my colleagues, my clinical colleagues, all saying before March, masks are useless. There's no evidence they would work for this in the general public.
Yeah, Fauci said the same thing, although it's hard to find that footage now.
Now they say exactly the opposite. And these doctors that I've known for years have completely switched their stripes. I asked them, well, what about Norway? What about Sweden? What about Denmark? What about Holland? What about Finland? Are they all wrong? Are they crazy? Is there like 20 million crazy people up there? They have no answer. They have no response. Because I think what's happened is our country has C19 derangement syndrome. Our leaders, our professionals have basically thrown logic, reason, and evidence out the window to maintain their social position.
For people who don't wear masks because of things like what you've just relayed now, they will not be allowed on airplanes. They will be removed from stores, banks, post. You can't do anything in the post office. They'll probably call the cops. How can the population push back without causing massive disruption? Is it a matter of waiting it out and grinning, putting on the stupid diaper face mask, and because you don't want your good friend who runs a grocery store to get dinged by the county health department? It's a bind for people.
I agree, and I think the best way to handle this is the way we handle everything. We vote with our feet. Mm-hmm. We go to the look. I've just moved from California and Nevada. Where I am in Nevada, they're not as strict on this stuff. And if Nevada starts enforcing California's mask laws, I'll move to Utah or I'll move to South Dakota. By the way, the governor of South Dakota, Governor Noem, is a very courageous lady. I heard her this morning on NPR, and what she said made perfect sense. This is an individual decision. It's not a government decision. And by the way, there's nothing in the government that says that some public health official has a right to lock everybody down forever until he decides it's okay. I mean, is Anthony Fauci the absolute ruler? He certainly doesn't seem to be following the Constitution. And so go to the states where they let you live your life. I mean, I'll be happy to move to South Dakota if that's the only state that allows schools to actually function the way schools are supposed to function, and allows people to live without wearing these silly masks that have no scientific evidence behind them.
Do you think?
And everyone should move, to a state that they want to, or if you really are scared, stay in California, hide under your bed, but don't make the rest of us.
Hydrochloroquine. I understand there was a Lancet journal wrote some kind of study indicating it may increase risk for some cardiac issues, and then I've read that was actually refuted soundly. President Trump mentioned it, and ever since it's been a politicized thing. Some doctors think that it's like a political tell. If you're pro-hydroxychloroquine, you're a MAGA guy, and you should, practice dog catching. Or if you're anti, it became needlessly politicized. What's your view on hydroxychloroquine for prophylactic use?
Well, I agree with what you just said. It's like everything else about C19 has become totally politicized. The science has been completely separated from reality. And we just don't have good evidence. And you mentioned that one article that was retracted. It turns out that there's a whole website of articles that have been retracted by major journals like Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine, where they've said one thing and then, oops, now we got to retract it a few weeks later. Everything about C19 appears to be upside down and backwards. The virologists aren't doing virology, they're doing politics. The politicians aren't doing politics, they're doing virology. Where does Gavin Newsom get the absolute scientific genius to say if the case rate in Ventura County falls another 200 per 100,000, then we get to open the schools or open the restaurants or open this?
He drew that from where?
Yes.
Right.
So the science is just not there on any of this stuff. It's really sad.
Can you retrieve? We can off the air if you can't remember it at the moment. I'd love to get that website and put it into the show notes at patrickcoffin.media. That's really fascinating. Yeah. I'd also like, if someone's listening and maybe they know this exists, a compilation of physicians and other researchers who've been banned and shamed and sidelined. Because that would be a great conference. I would host a conference of the band. We could call it Voyage of the Band.
Yes.
Because the average person is, if all you're doing is siphoning from the teat of CNN, you're in a heap of darkness, brother.
Yep. I can give you two names. I don't know if you've interviewed them yet. Kurt Vitovsky and John Ioannidis.
Okay. Ioannidis, yeah, I know that name. Stanford?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. He is one of the courageous people who's spoken the truth about C19, and he's been slammed by his academic colleagues for doing so. And same with Vitovsky at, I forgot, it's in New York. I think it's Rockefeller.
Kurt Vitovsky? Or is that another one?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sure your colleagues at USC have only given you high fives and warm embraces, right? Tongue removed from cheek.
Yeah, let's not go there. I want to keep my tenured job, which is supposed to be able to protect me, but who knows?
Well, science.
I don't know how we're going to be teaching, a university level curriculum and charging our students $70,000 to watch cable TV, Zoom classes. I don't think that model is going to work for universities. I think they're either going to have to charge much less, or they're going to have to be a real university with real professors and real students and do real classes, real education, and real laboratory research and knowledge generation.
Well, somehow as a society, we've been collectively willing to burn the house down to kill one termite. I really appreciate your time, Dr. Hay. I've learned so much from this session. I know there's going to be awesome feedback, and who knows, I'd be honored to collaborate down the road. Thanks for doing what you do. The website's joelhay.com. You can find that as well at patrickcoffin.media. Any final profundities? Something that maybe we left out?
No, just thanks for having me on, and we really have to get this message out there. And if anybody wants to help us, first of all, take our survey at joelhay.com. We didn't get a chance to talk about the results that again show that the young people are being hammered. This has really impacted their future. If you're, far enough along in your career that you're successful, or if you're retired, you're doing fine. Yeah. But if you're caught as a young person with no career, or someone mid-career who now has lost that job that they're never going to get back in the service business, then we need help. And go to joelhay.com, take our survey, and we'd love to engage with you.
Yeah, if you really want to prevent deaths, because a whole lot more people have died from all these social disruptions than from C19 itself, then go there. By the way, all the books, references, I didn't mention the grilling that Representative Jim Jordan gave of Fauci, and Fauci refused to answer a simple question: what about protests? No masks at protests. Does COVID-19 magically go up into the stratosphere when you have a violent, a riot? No, he wouldn't commit to it. So more weaponized ambiguity. All of it can be found, including the COVID-19 survey at joelhay.com. The website for all of it is patrickcoffin.media. Professor Hay, thanks for being a gift. Appreciate your work very much.
Thank you, Patrick.
This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there? Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.